the oldest and largest of Dogmen. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my Uncle Freddie got called a hermit by almost everybody in our town, but he was friendly to me, and he was viewed as non-threatening by the local Dogman population. He observed the Dogman for decades, but since nobody cared what an old hermit said about creatures that weren't supposed to actually exist, I was the only one he passed any of his observations along to. The 5th anniversary of his passing was last month, and since then, I can't stop myself from thinking about all his old Dogman stories. Uncle Freddie lived in the vicinity of the Huron-Manistee National Forests, but I better not get too much more specific than that. There likely are still a population of the animals living over there, and if I told you the exact location, it would be overrun with tourists and hunters in no time. Better to allow the Dogman his chance to live free for as long as he can manage it. According to Freddie, the adult males of the species would generally wander like Kane from the old Kung Fu TV show, making his own life until or unless he finds a female to start a family with. There was a general collection of them that stayed in the area most or all of the year, and that group included the mothers, the youngest, some of the fathers, and the oldest. The species seemed to maintain its biological diversity by accepting males from faraway regions as fathers for the women, who would remain in one location, or at least a smaller set of migratory locations. Sometimes when Freddie saw juveniles, he could tell right off who the father was, and other times he'd have to guess, but there was never any confusion who the mother was. The offspring seemed to usually live with the female parent until they were about the size of a young human being, at which point they either set off on their own to spread the seed wide if they were male, or become involved in the activities of the enclave of females and young ones that formed the backbone of the local clan. Freddie imagined that the Dogman must wander all over the entire United States and much of Canada, but the places most known for sightings of the animals must logically be the places where the females and the children are hiding out. These would usually tend to be heavily wooded locations, with extensive cave systems unknown to or little used by human beings. Uncle Freddie would always talk about this stuff like he knew it firsthand. I know he learned some of it from firsthand experience, but I wonder how much of it was guesswork on his part. Like if you see that old film of Grover Krantz talking about Bigfoot, he goes from talking about plaster foot casts to stating his personal theories of Bigfoot mating habits, as though these were scientifically documented facts, instead of a few minutes. Grover Krantz couldn't tell how a Bigfoot mated by looking at his footprints, so why did he even say that stuff? It was like he was daydreaming out loud. So even as a kid, I always wondered how much of what Freddie had to say was cold hard fact that he learned from experience, and how much was him believing in his own daydreams and suppositions about these real physical animals. Now, one of the things that Uncle Freddie insisted to me was that there are two kinds of animals in the world, the human kind and the Dogman kind. The human kind grow into adulthood and reach their maximum size. If they overeat after they reach that size, they just get fat. Then, on the other hand, there are some kinds of animals that, if you put them in an environment where they don't face predators and they have more than enough to eat, they will just continue to grow and grow in size. Anyone who's seen a hogzilla knows what I'm talking about. A hog with enough food and no enemies can grow larger than large. I don't just mean that they get fat, but their body grows larger. Their arms grow longer to keep their belly off the ground, and their muscles grow stronger to carry all that weight around. Now, if we assume that a Dogman is like a hog in this manner, and my Uncle Freddie was certain of this, then there might be no limit as to how tall and wide a Dogman might become. And in fact, Freddie did make claim to having multiple experiences with an immense old Dogman that he called Grandpa. The Grandpa Dogman was bigger than a small house, with Freddie insisting to me that he was 25 or 30 feet tall, depending on how upright he was standing. Of course, the further you grow above 7 or 8 feet tall, the fewer reasons you have for standing up straight. You're not going to run into that many individuals that you're going to see eye to eye with anymore. For this reason, Uncle Freddie was never able to say quite how tall the Grandpa Dogman was. When I would ask, Freddie would just tell me that Grandpa was as big as he needed to be in any given situation, and leave it at that. Uncle Freddie told me a story about how he once saw the Grandpa Dogman chasing 2 maverick horses through the countryside. He watched hidden behind a tree as they raced from his left to way off on his right in the distance. He thought that was interesting, but shortly thereafter, he saw them all come running back, this time from his right to way off on his left. When they crossed back on each other for the 3rd time, Freddie realized he wasn't watching a hunt. The dog and the horses were running around each other for fun. When you're the size of that Dogman, same size as a horse when running on all fours, I don't suppose there are many creatures left to test your speed against. You know, the idea of something like a Dogman having fun was such a shocking notion for me. Freddie had done so much work to instill a deep fear of Dogman into me that it was hard to accept that he was anything but misery and evil. True, to humans, the Dogman is a dead-end street. But even creatures as close to pure objective evil as the Dogman, at least from our perspective, can have a need for entertainment and lighter times when it doesn't think there are any humans or other potential prey around. It's just hard for me to accept a villain kicking his shoes off and having a beer at the end of the day. Sure, after a hard day making the nightmares of humanity worse, the Dogman likes to play hacky sack. It's just jarring. It seems to trivialize all the misery brought into the world by this creature and other demonic presences like it. I don't want to sympathize with cockroaches and vermin on the one hand, and I don't want to sympathize with things that could potentially be man-eaters either. To put things back in perspective, Uncle Freddie told me that you had to keep your head low when the Grandpa Dogman was in the vicinity. Once, Freddie had allowed friends staying with him for a few days, and this friend liked to tell stories in a grand and theatrical way. He'd stand and gesticulate. He'd show you how different people in his stories walked. He was very invested in the drama. Uncle Freddie said that one night, while that friend was staying there, the woods were extra quiet. Freddie said he explained to his buddy that the forest was having a quiet night, and that he'd have to hold back on his wild stories until the next night. His friend didn't care, though, and told his stories anyway. Now, even the smallest and dumbest of animals in the woods knows that when the forest is quiet, it's for a good reason. In this case, it was because the Grandpa Dogman was hanging out nearby in the darkness. Whatever animals saw or smelled him went quiet, and when the animals of their kind next over noticed the radio silence, they in turn put out their lights and went undercover too, trying to draw as little attention to themselves as possible. I wish we humans commanded that kind of respect from smaller animals. Imagine if flies were afraid of us instead of being intent on annoying us as much as they can. And in that sense, Uncle Freddie's friend was like a housefly in that he didn't get it. He didn't care if he annoyed the meanest guy on the mountain. So he went on telling his loud stories until Freddie said he could hear the launch of a boulder flying with force up into the night sky, taking branches and leaves with it until it was free of the woods, after which its downward arc began, ending as it whizzed past the verbose storyteller's face, missing taking his head off by about 5 inches. Needless to say, that was the end of story time for the evening. I asked Freddie how he knew it wasn't a Bigfoot that threw the boulder. They're known for doing that exact same thing. Freddie shrugged his shoulders and said he really didn't know for sure. It's just that it's Michigan, and his home was closer to the Grandpa Dogman and his family than it was to any Bigfoot turf that he was aware of. There were a number of other stories Freddie told to demonstrate the potential danger of the Dogman in general, but the Grandpa Dogman in particular. One day, Fred said he noticed a truly large dogman laying in wait behind a patch of trees in the woods, facing toward his house. He became paranoid that the creature was part of a team of them, staging an event against him, and he found a location to hide and scout out the hillside. While he was monitoring the situation, Fred said a young deer wandered in front of the hiding dogman. It had been waiting to ambush the deer. It wasn't concerned with Uncle Freddie at all. When the dogman sprang out, it revealed itself to be the big old Grandpa Dogman, too large to even be believable. I think he was used to creatures dropping in a faint at his feet, because according to Uncle Fred, the dogman sprang out, but did not grab the deer to dispatch it. The deer bolted, taking a chance on freedom with 5 or 6 good-sized leaps. The dogman had such a size advantage that he merely stood up to his full height, skipped forward a few quick steps, then used his long arms to grab hold of one of the much faster animal's hind legs. In that way, he was able to easily turn his size into speed, or at least the equivalent of speed. He was able to get what he wanted, while rarely having to expend much effort or even get winded. This dogman must have been the champion of his generation. The more success he had, the larger his body grew, making it easier and easier for him to have more and more success, and harder for anyone to defeat him. He was so much more capable of almost anything when compared to the average adult dogman that he was almost like another species entirely. He wasn't just large, he was intelligent too. His intelligence had allowed him to become large in the first place. He had started off with the best skills of his generation, and now was able to defeat the grandchildren of his own generation in direct combat. He was a super dogman. One time, the Grandpa Dogman came to stay too close to Freddie's shed, so he packed his backpack and went hiking for a while to give the big animal some space. Supposedly, according to Fred, it was during that time when he found a woman who had been being held captive and set her free. I was confused. She was being held captive by who? Freddie said she was being held by the Grandpa Dogman, back in the location he would normally be staying in. I was very curious about this woman, and I would ask questions about her much more often than Freddie would want to answer. He either didn't want to talk about her, or he just didn't have much information on her, one or the other. If she was being held captive by the Grandpa Dogman, I didn't understand what sort of imprisonment it was. Freddie had sometimes said that the big one lived back with the women and children, deep underground a higher elevation of land. It didn't sound like that was where he found this supposedly captive woman to me. At any rate, Freddie said that after he freed that human woman, the Grandpa Dogman stopped coming around on Freddie's turf. From then on, he stuck closer to his own home to watch that none of his stuff went missing. Whenever I would ask Freddie questions about that lady, I never understood his answers. Like, I asked him how long the big Dogman had been holding her captive, and he gave me a confused look. Why, the whole time, he said. All of it. Every single second. And then he gave me a sad and disappointed look, as though he realized I wasn't as smart as he had hoped, and that I wasn't understanding half as much of his stories as he thought I was. I hated to disappoint him, and I tried to understand his meaning as well as I could manage. Since I'm not a shrink, I could never tell which part of Fred's odd behavior was a result of him understanding things the rest of us never got to know, and how much of it was just the result of him having some screws loose. I tried as hard as possible to always give him the benefit of the doubt that he wasn't crazy, and that he really was educating me about the unseen world behind human civilization. My father says everything Uncle Freddie talked about came from his insane mind, but I know for a fact that not everything he talked about was made up. I know that there really are dogmen back in those woods, because there was that one time where I saw one too. It was after Freddie died. I was on the list of closest relatives, and we were all invited to come out to his shed and see if there were any parts of his old life that we wanted to take home as keepsakes to remember him by. I don't even think he owned that land, so it's not like we were fighting over the estate or anything. Although I had not organized the event, I did end up spending almost all day out there, helping my cousin out, knowing it was going to be my last time visiting my late uncle's secret hideout. All afternoon I had seen a big old dog laying out in the shade at the very edge of the tree line. It wasn't Hogzilla big. It was just like Marmaduke big, or maybe Scooby-Doo. It looked more like a wolf than like Scooby though, and it just seemed to be checking out what the humans were doing over at Fred's old shack now that he was gone. I wondered if that dog knew Freddie, and if it might be waiting for a snack. I didn't see any dog food in the place, so I don't think my uncle was feeding any of the local wildlife. Anyway, the day wore on, and soon came the bittersweet moment when my cousin and I were going to walk away from the shack, leaving the rest of it to whoever wanted it. We gave each other a hug, and she walked toward her car. I told her I needed a moment alone before I left, and she respected that. So as I stood there saying my final goodbyes and watching the sun setting in the west, that big old Marmaduke-sized wolf stood up. I don't mean he stood up in the way a wolf stands up. I mean, he stood up like a human being stands up. Like you would stand up. Or like how I would do it, but without the arthritis. The dog who had been watching us all day, and who I had been watching back, was standing up like a human being and looking right back at me. It had waited for everyone else to leave. It only wanted me to see this. I quickly rummaged for my phone so I could take a picture. I wanted to be able to show everybody. I wanted everyone to know that old Uncle Freddie was not so crazy after all. A photograph of that dogman would prove him sane for all time. Long before I had gotten the camera app to open, though, the dogman had stepped behind a tree. I could still see it there. I just knew I couldn't photograph it from there. It was like he was saying, "No photos, please." He wasn't really hiding himself, but nobody would believe me anyway. He just looked like a dog. He looked exactly like a wolf or a feral canine. There was nothing out of the ordinary about him, except that he had been observing me all afternoon, and then he stood up like a man. Actually, I guess those are two fairly out of the ordinary things. You know, I always talk about the Grandpa Dogman in the past tense, but Uncle Freddie never told me that the big guy had ever passed on. I don't know what the maximum lifespan for a dogman would be anyway. Maybe he's been gone for years? Or maybe he'll still be out there for years more. Who can really say? I doubt anyone else is going to go live in Uncle Freddie's shack to try to find out. Which means we'll all just have to wonder And guess what happened to that Hogzilla of the upright walking canids? If he is still among us, then long may he reign. If not, then I hope the memory lasts forever of the oldest and largest of Dogman. The dog days of January. A new Dogman story each day for the rest of the month here on Scary Stories NYC. Our badass new EP, we call them Ephron. They provide more relief than neo-synephrine. It's time to cheer and shout cowabunga. Our executive producer is Ephron Kalunga. Please join us in thanking our newest $10 channel member, Ephron Kalunga, for making this episode possible. Ephron gets all our perks, including our secret uncensored episodes, our secret advanced previews, and our over 21 hours of secret archived uncensored Dogman stories. And you can get these perks too by either joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com or else by doing what Ephron Kalunga did and clicking that join button to become a Scary Stories channel member. And now, to fill in any details I may have left out, here's international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com. And that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.